One of the strangest things about the man who fell to Earth is that he's never really left us. Walter Tevis first imagined Thomas Jerome Newton in his 1963 novel as an alien who comes to Earth to save his dying world and instead becomes trapped in ours. The character is one of science fiction's most enduring portraits of alienation. Nicolas Roeg turned that story into the haunting 1976 film with David Bowie, a movie that is now this year celebrating its 50th anniversary and still feels like it has arrived from somewhere else. Then the idea resurfaced in a 1987 television pilot, returned in 2015 through David Bowie's stage work Lazarus, and came back again in the 2022 Showtime series with Bill Nighy as the older Newton. In this episode of Sound, Light, and Frequency, we'll be breaking down each version, like we did for War of the Worlds a few episodes back, going through them in chronology. Because maybe every generation gets the Thomas Jerome Newton they deserve. Who knows? What we do know is that David Bowie, the person, before he became David Bowie, the rock god, was also an experiencer of the UFO phenomenon. We'll be talking about that also in this episode. So this is not just a fan conversation about a cult classic. It's a question about why this one image keeps repeating. The brilliant but broken visitor who cannot go home. Are there any of them actually walking around our planet for real? Brent, how do you account for the staying power of this concept?
It's a great question. I would attribute it to the fact that there's a duality to the story. On one hand, there's the fantasy of, I've met an alien. I've discovered that there's a lone alien walking on Earth, and I alone have a relationship with them. And they have answers and more insights to them. And especially in the case of this franchise, for the most part, the character of Newton is benevolent, or at least neutral, and so does not pose a threat. I think that idea of the lone alien is also something that creates a little bit of fear. What if they come down and they are hostile? What if I was the one that discovered someone who might hurt me and other people, and I'd have to blow the whistle on them? So I think that contained version of a singular alien invasion, if you will, holds a lot of interest because it's a story that is also manageable. It's easy to tell. It's much more of a human story because we're not into a War of the Worlds scenario. And I think that as soon as it becomes 2 aliens or 3 aliens, then you're tipping over into alien invasion and you're into a different genre.
Amen, brother, to all of that. I love doing Sound, Light, and Frequency for so many reasons. Even if I've seen something before, I have to see it again. And what I find over and over while doing this show with you, Brent, is that I always see it with very different eyes. Because the times when you see it originally, you're experiencing the movie, life goes on, and in many cases, many years go on. So by the time you see it again, you're not the same person who saw it the first time. And the way you look at it has changed. Society has changed. The whole world has usually changed before you see some of these. And that applies, frankly, to something you might have seen 3 or 4 years ago. For example, we are going to be later talking about the TV series version that Showtime did, which I saw when it came out in 2022. But in rewatching that in the last few days, I've went, wait a minute, is that how that worked? Whoa. I can only imagine how anybody who, if they listen to this episode, says, I want to go back and watch The Man Who Fell to Earth from 1976. Most of our audience probably wasn't even alive when it was out the first time. And they'll be in for a treat, of course. But obviously, we were there for the original. So, what was your first take when you first saw it?
My reaction the first time I saw it was quite different than other times that I saw it, and certainly when I saw it recently to get ready for this show. My first encounter with The Man Who Fell to Earth was I was on a date in high school, and it was late, and I was with a girl, and she didn't want to go home, and I didn't want to take her home, but what can we do? And it was like, let's go see a movie.
I want to hear that story. Forget the movie. Yeah. All right, go on. Continue.
Yeah. So at any rate, we got to the theater, and it was one of those like triplexes where there was 3 movies, and it was like, okay, what's the next movie playing? The Man Who Fell to Earth. Now, I was a David Bowie fan at the time, so I thought, I don't care what the movie is. David Bowie's in it. Let's just go see it. We had no idea what the movie was. We walked in to see it, and it was, if I remember correctly, a midnight showing of the film, because this was after it came out. So we walk in, we sit down, the movie starts. And the thing about the movie, the original, is I think I'll be kind and say it's an art film. It was made by Nicolas Roeg, who's made a lot of very kind of unique movies. And the story is told in nonlinear fashion, very disjointed, and it's fairly slow paced. And at that point in the night, we were a little tired, and about halfway through, we both nodded off. By the time the movie ended, we crawled out of our seats and went back and went home. And I had just an impression of it. That's not a movie that I was into at all. And it wasn't really until I went back and watched it in college with some friends, and we were suddenly taken by it and how interesting it was, how unique it was. And then again, fast forward to getting ready for the show, looking back on it, and now having lost David Bowie and having a sense of nostalgia about that, the movie is very endearing to me. It's challenging because it doesn't meet the conventions of today's cinema in terms of how the story is told, but there's a real interesting, heartfelt somberness to it that I thought was quite fascinating.
I agree with all of that. Although it's interesting, my experience is slightly different. I think in a previous episode, I was talking about when I was just a young guy doing a radio news gig at the local hippie FM station. And I was covering the Travis Walton thing. So I'd already been talking about, in just a few months before this came out, about a guy that was beamed up. So now this was a movie about a guy that fell down, right? So I was like, that'll be very interesting. And I had the same thing with you. It was a new movie. So it wasn't one of those midnight flicks that you got to see on college campus. It was one that you had to go pay at the theater to watch. And I was eager to see it. I really had good expectations. As I watched it, a couple of things hit me. I didn't really know David Bowie very well. I've come to appreciate his music for sure over the years. But at the time, I was more of a Beatles guy and Stones and things. I just wasn't doing Bowie that much. So I didn't really know him very well as a rock star, but he really captivated me in his performance. But I was like you. I was like, what is really going on here? What? And listen, none of that is cleared up 100% upon a rewatch, except for the fact that now you can watch videos and talk to people and read reviews. So things that I was a little confused about, I can be unconfused on. And by the way, I should say, Brent, we have to say there are spoilers here, folks. Okay?
Yeah.
Come on. This is a 1976 film. If you're going to wag your finger at us for spoiling the film, then stop now, go watch it, or don't watch it or whatever. But yeah, we're going to talk about how it ends in this thing. And we're going to talk about how the other versions of The Man Who Fell to Earth end. But Brent, one of the things that really struck me in the rewatch was the callbacks of certain things, because I guess I've watched more films, obviously, since I had then. And three things really stuck out to me. These medical scenes at the end where they're semi-medically torturing Thomas Jerome Newton. They reminded me of the Ludovico technique in Clockwork Orange. They had a familiarity to it. Another great 70s film.
Yeah.
Also, the place where they keep him at the very end, where he's just locked up and he's alone, and you really feel the isolation and everything. Felt like the grunge version of the French bedroom in 2001: A Space Odyssey. I just felt his isolation and loneliness there. And then when he finally gets out and flees into the white hallway, that reminded me of THX 1138, which I believe is that George Lucas student film that he got to later film. I'm not saying that these were borrowed in any way. I'm just saying my film ability to see things differently was there. So I had a great time watching it again. And I have to say, as I watched it, I felt like I was seeing it for the first time because I'd forgotten so much of it.
Yeah.
And it was a joy to do it.
Yeah. I'd forgotten the first half that I didn't sleep through, and I certainly didn't. The whole second half was new to me the next time I saw it. But looking at it with new eyes through the lens of sound, light, and frequency, I'm excited to dive deep into it and take a look at how all of this relates to ufology.
Yeah, and just to say, this isn't a fan thing. I don't know that we're reviewing it per se because we're talking about the other things and all that. But I did, in my research, look up something. I thought it would be fun to just read this out loud right now. I found Roger Ebert's review of The Man Who Fell to Earth, which he wrote at the time. He wrote, "It requires an almost courageous leap of the imagination to take Nicolas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth seriously. Here's a film so preposterous and posturing, so filled with gaps of logic and continuity, that if it weren't so solemn, there'd be the temptation to laugh out loud. And yet at the same time, this is a film filled with interesting ideas. It's like a bunch of tentative sketches for a more assured film that was never made. So I always loved Roger Ebert. I didn't agree with him on everything. And I think what's interesting is he's probably not wrong in his sort of dismissive way to talk about it. And yet at the same time, what I found is the ideas are so much more interesting.
Yes.
I don't think Roger Ebert, I don't know what his opinions of UFOs and the paranormal and the phenomenon or any of that stuff was. But I did think to myself, maybe, just maybe he wasn't seeing it on that elevated level, possibly. Right? Because he's just a film reviewer. Anyway, folks, spoilers ahead. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
I'm Brent Friedman. Years ago, a family friend who became a cabinet member in the Reagan administration disclosed to me that aliens are real, they're here, and he'd seen them.
I'm Bryce Zabel. Later, when we were producing Dark Skies, an NBC TV series about an alien invasion, we were approached by men who said they were from the Office of Naval Intelligence, and they wanted to give us inside information in exchange for access to our show.
We didn't take that deal, but we have never stopped thinking about it.
That's why we do this podcast. We're working out ideas in real time about how Hollywood has portrayed aliens and why.
Every episode is different because there are so many questions.
We're looking for answers. It's an active investigation. Let's do this together. All right, then we're back and we're talking about The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is something that's really stood the test of time. It goes back to 1963 when an author named Walter Tevis wrote the original book. And I didn't read the book in full. And Brent, I know you didn't. We didn't.
No.
That's not where we started our The Man Who Fell to Earth work. Although I did buy it as a Kindle and read it, some pages of it. I thought it was great. And by the way, the man who wrote it, I don't know if you know this, but the man who wrote it also wrote The Hustler, The Color of Money, and The Queen's Gambit, which was a big Netflix thing a few years back. Right?
Yes.
So he's the author who wrote a bunch of stuff you know about, but you don't know anything about him.
Fascinating. Okay.
So there you go.
Right.
What's your take on the book, though? Do you know any? Got any facts and figures to throw out here?
The book follows the same basic plot. And I found that the book seemed very intent on presenting basically an allegory for corporate corruption, right? And it seemed to be because when it was written, 1963, it was also looking at the emergence of kind of the traps of consumerism and the loss of idealism, right? It came out in, I think, right around the time that John F. Kennedy was being assassinated, right? It really was representative of its day in terms of the messages it wanted to convey.
Yeah, I think you just really nailed something there. When the book first came out, Kennedy was still in office. So it represents, in some respects, an alien has come to Earth, and you start to read it, and then it becomes the post-assassination book, where it's all about the irony and the cynicism and all of that. I do think one thing is probably clear about the novel, and this is true of most adaptations. The novel is a little clearer than the film about what Newton's mission is, because obviously he had to write a book about it. So you get a little more sense of that. But I don't know that is necessarily a knock on the film itself, because if the film was as specific as the book about what Newton is doing there and all the details, it would lose some of its mystery.
I think that's probably why they leaned into the nonlinear storytelling, was they wanted to keep it more mysterious, more elliptical, and be unsure about what exactly Newton's agenda is, who he is, what's going on. And they were able to sustain that for a period of time in the movie. And that wasn't really the case as I understood it in the book.
Let's also be authentic here about if it wasn't such a big hit that they grabbed it off the bookshelves and turned it into a movie. It comes out in 63. They don't start adapting it, I believe, until 75 and maybe as early as a little earlier. But so it took a while to find its way into filmdom, but that's a good place for us to start, because let's face it, nobody who's listening to us has read the book either. So let's move on. Many of us have seen this film. Let's talk film.
All right. So the film came out in 1976. As we mentioned earlier, it was directed by Nicolas Roeg. We know it was based on this book by Tevis. And the plot is still basically the same. And let me just recap it a little bit. It's about a humanoid alien who goes by the name of Thomas Jerome Newton, who arrives in the American Southwest. His homeworld is suffering from a catastrophic drought, and his intention is to amass enough wealth on Earth to build a spacecraft capable of transporting water back to his homeworld of Anthea. That's the log line.
That's pretty fair. It does make you wonder, though, how large a spacecraft was this guy really supposed to build to transfer water to save a planet?
Yes, that was my big practical question. And I thought, I guess this is going to entail lots of trips back and forth.
And yet they're building one spacecraft and they say time is of the essence. I don't know that's even true. And also, if you're going to steal enough water from the Earth to save an entire planet, that probably would be something that was not a neutral act. You would literally be transporting a whole lot of water, however you did it. Just a couple of quick points of order, if you will, on what that story is about. There's some key elements in this thing. When he shows up, he engages a patent attorney named Oliver Farnsworth, who's played by the great Buck Henry.
Yes.
All right. And he also brings in a guy named, this has always been one of my favorite things. The name of the character is Dr. Nathan Bryce.
Yes.
But Bowie keeps calling him Bryce. Everyone in the film calls him Bryce.
Bryce, yeah.
And so I remember the first time seeing it going, that's pretty cool. And this guy he's a brilliant but compromised former professor kind of guy. All right. Mm-hmm. So that's who Bowie's got to help him with his plan to make money and build a ship and save his world. But along the way, he gets derailed by two things: sex and alcohol. I think which, by the way, has derailed many a human being as well.
I was going to say that's one of the great ironies here, is that he comes here with certainly a higher intelligence, and he uses that intelligence as he intends to create some revolutionary technology that he then patents. And he's able to some degree, execute his vision, execute his plan. But the problem is he's fallen to earth, where there are distractions and temptations. And again, think about the story from Tevis' point of view, which is he's trying to show what life is becoming, right? Where even the most noble of intentions are getting slowed down and embroiled in what modern society is becoming. And the idea that an alien comes down with all of this supreme intelligence, but he's very human in that he doesn't have the emotional intelligence to rise above all of these things that pull him down and ultimately thwart his mission.
And people keep feeding him alcohol and he becomes addicted. He becomes an alcoholic. He can hold his liquor pretty good, it seems, but he's constantly drinking. And that's not good for him. And then he hooks up with a character named Mary Lou, who's the salt of the earth. I think she's a hotel worker from Oklahoma or something. And she's played by the great Candy Clark, who comes out of American Graffiti.
Yeah.
And she's just a sweet person, a little high strung, but she loves this guy. Even when she learns he's an alien, she loves him, which God bless her, because he's a creepy looking alien when he actually takes off the stuff at one point, because he's so tired of masquerading as a human, and he allows her to see him as he is. And she does not like what she sees. And yet she still loves him.
Yes.
So that's love for you. One thing I just thought was just an image for you, though. When they made this movie, Roeg, the director, did not have David Bowie in mind. The first person he wanted to cast was Michael Crichton. Now, I don't know if everyone remembers Michael Crichton, but he was the author of The Andromeda Strain and Jurassic Park.
Yes.
I mean, and many other books.
Yeah,
very successful writer, not considered an actor. But then neither was David Bowie that much at the time he was cast. But Roeg thought that what would be so good about Crichton is that he's so tall and that he would just stand
like
out.
6'7" or 6'8". He
just
was
a gigantic guy. And so it was actually quite a twist. And I wonder how I would have responded to a gigantic Newton as opposed to Bowie, who comes across as extremely slight. You could blow him away in a hard wind, right? He literally, from the moment he steps foot into the earth, he's not well. It's not his favorite environment. It's not the right place for him to be, but he's carrying on because he's on this mission. Final interesting thought, just to set the world here, because with a lot of movies, you have to figure like, what's the time frame? How do our characters aging or whatever? This movie says, damn right they are. And what happens is David Bowie, as the Jerome character in this movie, is always David Bowie as the Jerome character. He's not aged up or anything.
Right,
He's white as a ghost, it seems like, but he's got shocking red hair, which we've seen before, but he's the same guy all through the movie. But particularly toward the end, everybody else is aging.
Yes.
Dramatically. And so I knew that, and I've always accepted that because I thought that's interesting. He's put this costume on,
this disguise. Yeah.
This disguise. And a couple of nights ago, I'm watching the extras on the movie, and I watch a piece with the writer, Paul Meyerberg, who, by the way, here's just a little tidbit. For those of you who are writers and are saying, I'm never goddamn going to make it in this business, Paul Meyerberg wrote 39 scripts before they produced his very first script, The Man Who Fell to Earth.
Wow. That is perseverance.
Think about that. Anyway, back to time. So a lot of time went into his success. But what Meyerberg says in his interview, I did not catch the first time. He said, this film has a lot to do with time. And he went into this explanation, Brent, where he started saying there's past, present, future. The future's affecting the past, but also the present, and the past is affecting the future. And what he described was like Dark, the TV series that we talked about a while ago. Now, I never saw that in the film the first time I saw it. And if it's in there, it's subtle. And he described a scene that I had not seen, which he said, while they're driving around, they shot most of this in New Mexico, including one scene in Roswell, which I found interesting. But they're driving around New Mexico, and Bowie's in the car, and he looks outside the car and he sees a pioneer family. Did you see this in the film? I missed it.
No, I missed that too.
Maybe it got cut out and it's in the director's cut. I don't know what. I'm sure we'll get notes on it. But what Meyerberg says is he sees this pioneer family, which is like 150 years in the past, but he's experiencing them as if it's just a time dilation kind of thing. And he said what was interesting is the way he wrote it is the family actually sees Bowie driving around in this car as one of those weird little time.
Oh, wow. No, I
never got that.
I don't think that's in the final film, because I think I would have, there was a lot of strange things in the movie, but that probably would have struck me as the strangest.
Yeah, that one surprised me.
So let me give a little more cultural context here. I mentioned before that I was a big fan of David Bowie. So in 1976, when the movie came out, David Bowie was already a rock star.
You bet.
And not just any rock star. He had a persona called Ziggy Stardust. And in, I think around 72, he released an album called The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. That's what it was. And from 72 to 73, he toured around the world. And Ziggy Stardust was this androgynous alien rock star. And that was his persona that he completely glommed onto. He dressed like an alien rock star. And this character took off. It made his album a huge success. And then when he came back from touring, he released another album, still embracing the Ziggy Stardust persona, called Aladdin Sane. And then he got bored, as most creatives do, with doing the same thing over and over again. And he decided he wanted to shed that persona and become someone else. And for the rest of his career, he was never Ziggy Stardust again. I say all of this because brilliant casting. You take David Bowie, who is at that point in 76 known as an alien rock star. That's his whole brand. And you put him in a movie where you're asking people to believe he's an alien.
Great casting, because according to Roeg himself in his interview, he did have his head on Crichton. But as soon as somebody said Bowie, and I think it was the writer that suggested Bowie, they couldn't get it out of their head. They just said, he's the perfect guy. We got to go get him. And apparently Bowie, who I'm sure had his own issues with drugs or alcohol and or was very well behaved on set. showed up and said, what do you need me to do? I'll do it. But you're right. Think about some of the songs like Space Oddity. And so it's a great converging of his persona with a character. He tried to give up his persona of Ziggy Stardust. I think he was tired of it in 73, which is 3 years before the movie came out. And the movie kickstarted it again. I wanted to I don't know why, but I have to say this because the character's name is Dr. Nathan Bryce. The first guy they wanted to play that was James Coburn, which is so interesting because if you know anything about Rip Torn, he kind of has that attitude, whereas whimsical, a little tiny bit of whimsical in it that he's portrayed over the years. James Coburn is a straight ahead guy with a little menace in him. It would have been an entirely different interpretation of that as well. But the point I wanted to make as well that I thought was very prescient about this film, because it's happening right now. In every scene that you see Bowie when he's Newton and he's coming back and he's filling in his time, he's watching TV. He starts with a single TV, then it's 3 TVs, then it's a wall of TVs. And what he's really doing, he has recreated with his wall of TVs what we all have in our pockets now, our cell phones.
Yes.
I just think the movie was very prescient about that. The idea that you need constant distraction. He'd be going from one thing to the next thing, watching this. And I wrote this one down because when he said it, I was like, holy shit, that's a really interesting comment. He's looking at a wall of TV screens and he's just there looking blank about it. But then he startles awake and he goes, get out of my mind, all of you. Leave my mind alone. Which,
wow. Yeah.
For all of you people who feel like your kids are watching too much TV or you're watching too much TV, I think we've all felt that, where it's not a thing that you do without consequence. Right. TV gets in your mind.
Yeah. I feel like that scene was a great example of Roeg sending a cautionary message at that time. Again, remember in the 70s of what media would become, and very prophetic in that regard. I think something else related to ufology that I find interesting, it was in the book and I don't remember if the exact words were used in the movie, but this idea that Newton comes to Earth as an alien with uncanny scientific knowledge. And how many times have we seen that in stories where aliens come down and they seem to always know more about the universe than humans do? Like right. that is a standard. Like you're not a self-respecting alien unless you can lord it over humans that you know what's really going on. Now, the other thing is that we've seen this play out in Disclosure Day, this idea that even if it's not the alien coming down with knowledge, it's the idea that uncanny scientific knowledge is passed down through downloads and through hybrids getting special messages and whatnot. But the big idea here is that non-human intelligence, whether it's in some sort of light being form or it's David Bowie falling to Earth, always knows more than humans. And it reinforces this idea that we are somehow trapped here in a material world and full of distractions and things that are somehow keeping us from reaching these heights that non-human intelligence or off-world entities have that can look down on Earth and understand how it all works. And again, I think this goes back to the fantasy I was mentioning before. Imagine if you met one of those people, right? You could ask them all sorts of questions. I know that for you and I, we look back on our meetings with JC and say, oh, we wish we had asked them more questions. Yeah. I am getting lots of people saying, why didn't you ask that Nordic on Orcas Island? What's really going on? Because I was scared for my life is the answer. But in retrospect, the Monday morning quarterback of me says, I would love to meet an alien because they have all of the secrets, it seems.
And they do have all of the secrets, it seems. But it's interesting what this film does about this, to hark back to TV. He says early on in his character as Newton that the way that they found out about the Earth and that they saw the Earth had all this water was from TV.
Yes.
That they had intercepted our TV signals. And which is something that goes back to Carl Sagan talking about that. And remember in his movie Contact, the first thing that ever is received by anybody outside of the Earth is an image of Hitler speaking at the 1936 Olympics because it was televised. So
Yes.
what they're saying in this film is that our television, whether we're seeking contact or not, we're putting out stuff that can be interpreted as contact. And that means I Love Lucy is contact, folks, if that's the case.
Yes.
Also, and I find this very interesting because it is true, and then we need to move on. But the film does merge that Bowie persona, Ziggy Stardust, into this Newton persona, which is very interesting. But here is Bowie, who is an incredible musician. And guess what? He doesn't do the soundtrack.
No.
They just couldn't get him to do it. It was all he could get his brain around was to actually do the acting. And he didn't do it. And so guess who did? The soundtrack is done by John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas.
I didn't realize
which kind of blew my mind. Now, here's one other final tidbit, and then we can move on to the next iteration. At the very end of the film, when Newton is talking to Dr. Nathan, Bryce has gone to what looks like Tower Records and listened to a record album that Newton has composed and put out there.
Yes.
And Newton asks him in the final scene, did you like it? And he goes, not really much. And Newton says, it wasn't for you. It was for my wife. Someday she'll hear it on the radio. Because again, radio signals are reaching out. Okay. Now you might say, okay, I know why they put that in the film. So when you watch that, folks, I want you to know it's in the book. They didn't put that in the film.
Interesting.
It was Bowie's character did not demand that he write a film. In fact, if anything, it actually looks almost a little wrong in the film because it's Bowie, but it came from the book. So,
and here's a nice little piece of trivia. Bryce, do you remember what the musical artist's name was that put that album out?
Oh, no.
Basically the pseudonym of Newton.
Yes.
The Visitor.
The Visitor, yes.
Yeah.
And also on the image of that, the reason I was stretching for that is that I believe on the image of the album, it's The Visitor, and it says a music phenomenon. Yes. Or something like that. The phrase, the phenomenon, is in there.
Yes, exactly.
So but you wouldn't have picked up on that in 1976.
No.
And only watching it today. Okay, look, we can still continue to reference this thing, but let's march forward because this thing is it's a critical success. I can't really remember if it made money. I don't know how much money it made. Maybe that doesn't even count. It was critically interesting to people, and certainly people who cared about UFOs and aliens at the time were very interested in it. So we got the book in the 60s, we got the movie in the 70s, and in the 80s, it comes, I was going to say roaring back, but that would be the wrong word to use. They released it as a movie of the week on ABC, and it's god awful. And I know this to be the case because I watched it recently to try to prepare for this. I didn't even want to talk about it. It was so bad. It's a 1987 TV pilot. They were thinking, oh, great. We got this great title, The Man Who Fell to Earth. It'll be a wonderful TV series. So they shoot a 2-hour pilot. It doesn't get picked up the series, but they release it as a movie of the week. And listen, I actually saw some of the credits on this thing, and I actually have met some of those people. So I'm not trying to pick a fight with anybody, but I think they would probably say it was of its time. And I can't even imagine the producers and the writers of that thing actually thought this was the right way to treat that material. It had to be an executive someplace who said, this is how we're going to do it. And this is what you need to do. All I can say, Brent, have you even seen a frame of this one, just out of curiosity?
No frames, but I did do a little reading on it. And the thing that struck me about just what I read in terms of encapsulations is that I guess in trying to make it episodic, they had essentially made it feel Newton's or the Newton characters had a day job to try and start this company and make some money and build a spacecraft. And so it really flattened out all of the idea of, he has to overcome distractions and temptations of modern society. And it was more just, no, this is just it's going to take a while to accomplish all he needs to do. So we're going to slice it up into hour-long episodes. And in doing that, they completely missed the point.
Yeah, totally. And that's a really astute observation, because if you break it down to the big building blocks, guy comes from a dying planet, crash lands on Earth, decides to use his scientific knowledge to make money, to build a craft. Those all match. And yet they aren't even close to the same film.
No.
And in fact, there's a guy named Lewis Smith, who I don't think most people know as an actor, who plays the Newton character, who they've renamed John Dory. I guess they renamed all the characters, and yet it's clear who they are. Brent, Lewis Smith in this 1987 film looks like Jerry Seinfeld from his show. And so the whole time I'm watching this thing, I'm going, it's just hard for me. Now, at the time, Jerry Seinfeld was nothing, so they didn't know they were doing that, but he looks like Jerry Seinfeld. So you're watching this thing, and it's this really bad movie where Jerry Seinfeld is playing the David Bowie role, and it doesn't track. So all I could say is they did certain things, as you point out. He has a son on Earth, and
they really humanized
adventures
him
together. It's so clear that whoever decided to make that version of it just said, this will be a vehicle, if you will. Right. The 1976 film is about alienation as spiritual collapse, which is interesting, right? That's powerful. The 87 version is about an alien trying to get home while becoming the lead of a possible TV series. And that's it. That's all it is. The strangeness that goes with the 1976 film gets domesticated, if you will, in this pilot episode. Yeah. And it really feels wrong because of what you just pointed out. It wants to be repeatable, but the Nicolas Roeg film is not repeatable.
No.
So in fact, which is going to take us in a moment to the 2022 thing where they didn't repeat it. They continued the story, which is interesting. But before we get there, unless you want to say something more about this stupid ABC pilot, then we're going to forget that one.
I've moved on already.
Let's move on to something of importance, which is the 2015 to 2016 stage play in New York, off Broadway. David Bowie has Michael C. Hall, who is Dexter, playing the Newton character. And so what is so powerful about this thing that impacted me just watching a few scenes of Michael C. Hall and all that was that Bowie put this thing together as he was dying of liver cancer.
Yes.
And this thing only plays for a little over a month and a half to 2 months. And Bowie dies, I believe, while it's in its final days. And he dies 2 days either before or after his final album, the 28th album, comes out.
Yes. I think before, actually.
Yeah, wow.
And so the interesting thing is that play actually started with a song called Lazarus. And that was meant to be, because he knew he was dying, his self-penned swan song and his farewell to his fans. And it was meant to, I read an interview where he intended that to be something that would help his fans accept the fact that he was passing on. And this idea of Lazarus of Bethany as being resurrected from the dead by Jesus. I think Bowie was using the song more as a metaphor. He was using it as I will live on through my music. And the legacy that I have left behind is what will never be gone. That will be eternal. I will always be here for you. That was the underlying message for him. A couple fun facts that I did not realize. Bowie never got to perform Lazarus live. He was too ill.
Originally, he wasn't even writing. He wasn't going to make it about Newton. It was going to be something about somebody finds Bob Dylan songs that didn't exist.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
No, it was something about finding some lost songs by Bob Dylan that he was actually going to write, David Bowie. And wow.
There's an alternate history world for you.
Talk about shifting timelines. It makes me feel a little sad and certainly nostalgic to think that this is how he went out. At the same time, imagine being able to put out an album right as you're passing and put on a play and be able to say goodbye to the world in such a creative way. I think that's pretty profound.
Okay, there's the artistic part of that. And I'm not going to comment on that at this point, other than that people who saw it liked it. Right? It's a musical. Michael C. Hall playing David Bowie, playing Thomas Newton. Okay. So you got that, but it's just fraught with meaning because of it, but it doesn't add a lot of meaning, I don't think, to the whole falling to earth, other than it appears the Bowie character is, on our planet anyway, an immortal almost.
Yeah.
And so he can't die. And yet in the play, it seems like he wants to die, that he's trying to die, but he's condemned not to die somehow.
Right. Look, I think there's something else to bring up here. You touched on it earlier, but this seems like a good inflection point before we move on to the more recent incarnation of the story. And if you think about the message of this, David Bowie did a lot of things in his career. He was around for a long time, a ton of accomplishments. As I mentioned, his Ziggy Stardust, he retired that after a couple of years, but he created other personas throughout his whole life. And yet when he was dying, what character did he choose to go out as, right? The Newton character. And so, as you mentioned earlier, I wonder if it had anything to do with him being an experiencer himself. What do you think?
I'm going to let you tell that story of his experiencing, because I don't feel I have all the facts there, but I do know that he saw many a UFO in his day.
Yes.
But at a time in his life, if I'm not mistaken, before he was actually David Bowie rock god.
Correct. So this will go quick, but I think it's really important, and it's a nice wrap up on Bowie as Newton. So in 1968, so this is pre-rock star Bowie, he gave an interview later about this time where he had seen significant UFO activity from an observatory up to 7 times a night over the course of a year. And here's the quote that he gave in the interview, which I find fascinating. I used to work for 2 guys who put out a UFO magazine in England about 6 years ago, and I made sightings 6-7 times a night for about a year when I was in the observatory. We had regular cruises that came over. We knew the 615 was coming in and would meet up with another one, and they would be stationary for about half an hour. And then after verifying what they'd been doing that day, they'd shoot off. And that's the end of the quote. The fact that this all was just so routine for him, of course this guy became an alien rock star. Of course he identified with Newton. He had seen over the course of a year, a lot of us are not even going to see one UFO in our lifetime. And he was watching them seemingly every night that he went to work.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So Bowie was definitely, I guess he was aware of the situation. He was aware of the phenomenon. He took it as part of his life. And again, as you are correct, at the end of his life, he's calling back to the man who fell to earth, which I think gives it a heaviness and a meaning that it already had, but it amplifies it in a wonderful way. And as you said, it's the last time it's Bowie's well, actually, that isn't even Bowie's performance as Newton. Bowie's performance as Newton happens in the movie,
yes.
Period. Then
That's
this
it.
other guy, Lewis, gets to play him in the forgettable TV pilot.
Yeah.
Then Michael C. Hall gets to play him on Broadway. Okay. But now we're moving into the most recent part of this thing, which is in 2022, Showtime did a 10-part series, The Man Who Fell to Earth. And I remember watching it originally and thinking, oh, this will be an interesting remake. They'll have taken that flawed but brilliant film and stretched it into 10 episodes, and how interesting that'll be. But that's not what they did. It's 45 years later. And the person who is actually the film is about, the man who fell to earth in the 10-part Showtime series. And you're going to have to back me up on this. It's Chiwetel Ejiofor. Is that?
I'm more confident on the last name than the first name.
Okay. I hope that's right. And if I butchered his name, my apologies, because he does a very nice job. But he is not playing the David Bowie character. He's playing a character named Faraday, an alien that has literally followed up Bowie's mission. The Newton mission that Bowie did in the film has been lost. Obviously, he didn't get his ship off. He didn't steal a bunch of water. He didn't get back to his planet in time to save his wife and 2 kids. That didn't happen. And now it's 45 years later, and the Earth is in great trouble. And of course, his planet is obviously in great trouble. And this is the part that I thought was really wonderful because I'm a big Bill Nighy fan. And I first tipped to Bill Nighy as this incredible actor in Love Actually, the Christmas movie. Yeah. He's the drunken rock star who sings Christmas is all around you. And he's just so freaking funny in this role. And he's so wonderful. So I know I loved him for all these roles, but this is a serious role. He is playing the Bowie role, but it's 45 years later. And he has aged a little bit because Bill Nighy has aged a little bit. And he's great because he's been on the run. Remember, at the end of the film, he takes off. And I guess he's been on the run from the CIA for a long time. And the premise, of course, is that the mission has failed. His planet, which we haven't mentioned, is called Anthea. Mm-hmm. So Anthea is still dying. And this other alien gets sent who becomes Faraday, which is the Ejiofor character. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting is that they introduced some stuff that must be in the book, but was not really touched upon at all in the film, which is back on Anthea, there are drones and adepts, two classes. It's class warfare there. Mm-hmm. The adepts make all the decision and the drones do all the work, which you could argue we're getting with that ourselves right now. Right. And so what the Faraday character is a drone. Mm-hmm. And he was a drone that worked for Newton.
Yes.
And so he comes to town. It's a complicated plot. And I don't know how much of it we need to get into, but I just want to say a couple of things about the quality of it. The writing is very strong. The performances are very strong. I do think people could benefit and have a great time watching the film with Bowie. But I'd also say, don't write off the idea of watching this 10-part series because it's strong. Alex Kurtzman is one of the executive producers. He does a great job. And they try to make sense of the whole thing. It's so many of these things, Brent. Is it perfect? Not to everybody. It ain't perfect. How many things are perfect? The Godfather's close to perfect, but I don't know about anything else. But it was important and it captivated me and I enjoyed it. And I don't know whether you've seen all of it or some of it. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I watched some of it and then I read about it. My big takeaways were, let me get the things that bothered me out of the way first. But this idea that 45 years has passed and whatever drought-stricken problems Anthea had couldn't have gotten any better because David Bowie or Thomas Newton failed, right? And so now the character is coming, why did they wait 45 years? And then I thought, oh, maybe time is different on Anthea, right? Because it raises some practical issues. But I also found it interesting that when he comes down to Earth, again, the story doesn't focus as much on all of the, let's say, all the distractions for his mission. He comes down not trying to pull things over on humans so much. He just comes down and gets about his work. Right. I found, as big a Bowie fan as I was, I found Ejiofor's performance captivating. He brought humanity to the part of Faraday that I could relate to. I felt much more engaged with his problem than I did with Newton's. With Newton's, I was kind of detached, but I felt sad for him. It felt tragic.
Ejiofor actually becomes, if you think about it, the Steve Jobs of his time, which is fascinating because it's a reverberation off the film version of The Man Who Fell to Earth because Bowie becomes Elon Musk.
That's right? True.
Bowie or Bezos, because Bowie's company is going to send this craft off and they're not hiding it. It's a public thing. It's a big deal. And he gets kidnapped by the government right at the time when he's going to be the sole occupant of this craft going. And by the way, it was never explained there again how that craft was full of water or whether he was planning to steal the water after it. They never got a chance to do it. But the point is they're trying to reverb off, and they did successfully off some of the things.
The writers made a very interesting choice, and that I don't remember when, but there's like a flash forward early on that shows he succeeds. He's giving a speech about this revolutionary technology that he's created. And then we kind of go back and rewind and tell the whole story. And I thought, wow, that's interesting because it's such a high stakes and complicated mission. I was surprised that they told us, oh, here's where it's going, right up front. So it took away a lot of the mystery, I think, is what I really remember enjoying about the original film. And so it stripped all that away and it made it a little bit more conventional storytelling. I think the last point I want to make about this, which again, I just find this ironic, is in 1976, I think the character of Thomas Newton, as it was portrayed by David Bowie, felt very authentic to the cultural zeitgeist and how people might relate to aliens, right? They were probably seen by the higher ups and the government as a threat. We need to abduct them or we need to capture them and experiment on them. But humans were probably not, they didn't believe it was possible. Why? Because they hadn't been saturated with too many movies about an alien who comes to Earth. Yes. And I think in those 45 intervening years, the audience has had movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Alienation, The X-Files, Dark Skies, Men in Black, the list goes on. Alien. So if you're trying to tell a modern day story about the man who fell to Earth, he's falling to a very different Earth, an Earth that has been conditioned to accept that there could be aliens. A lot of people in the world right now believe that. And a lot of people believe they walk amongst us. And as you said, they're kind of hiding in plain sight, building spacecraft, sending them up. All of these things are completely acceptable today. And in 1976, all of that would have felt like science fiction. And that movie, in a weird way, did not. The original movie did not feel like science fiction. Very good point. And it is interesting because the people that are after Newton in the film are kind of cardboard in their own way. They're kind of ineffective. And honestly, there are parallels to Disclosure Day, Spielberg's thing, in this 10-part retelling, because there is a race on and their plan is to tell the whole world about something. And the people that are trying to stop them are private contractors, largely, and government, but it's a much more credible threat. And I just want to tip my hat to an unexpected actress. Kate Mulgrew plays this character, Drew Finch, who's in charge of stopping this. And she's very credible. She's tough as nails. I've rarely seen anybody portrayed that aggressively competent in maintaining the secret. I thought that was really good. I also want to just throw this out there. Bill Nighy is, every time he's on screen, he's magic, because not only is he magic, but the fact that he's Thomas Newton is so incredible to sort of, because he does embody the spirit of Bowie in his performances. And in that final episode, the 10th episode, his performance is just beyond great. He's angry and he's pissed. The Bowie version at the end of his film is resigned. Yes. The Bill Nighy version at the end of this thing is just pissed. Yes. He has lost his family. He's lost everything. And these people are doing it again and he ain't happy. And he just spits the venom out. And it's great. I just thought, hey, listen, so we could probably talk films and all that for a long time. But the premise we were kind of going for was to say, look, here's this idea that begins in 1963. And it becomes a book, a film, a pilot, a stage play, and a series that's really a sequel. And this character has had this extended life. What does it mean? With War of the Worlds, you really could say that War of the Worlds really was this malleable thing that you just it's like an alien invasion, and they're invading for every invasion in War of the Worlds, whenever it's been made, tells you about the times we live in. Do you think that's the same with the Thomas Newton character? I think War of the Worlds goes back to something more primal, that we are not the apex predators on this planet. If aliens invade, they will be in charge. They will take over. And again, that goes back to the fear fantasy. And I think with the Thomas Newton story, the stranded on Earth alien, I feel like the underlying premise there that makes it so compelling is they walk among us. And it goes back to something John Harrington said to me. He'd seen aliens. They're here. I still don't know exactly what that means, but I think we can use our imagination. They're here. Okay, what are they doing? Are they my neighbors? Are they the people in charge? Are they just here on a solo mission trying to engineer something to take off the off-world? In which case, they kind of just fit in. they're contributing to the economy and hopefully they're paying taxes. But if they're here with a more nefarious agenda, and I think even if I remember correctly, the most recent version of The Man Who Fell to Earth, part of the idea was that Newton in the original film had been a victim in some ways of Western culture, and that the new character of Faraday was going to embrace the idea of, what if we turn humans into drones? What if we actually bring the adepts down and they will be in charge and we'll make the humans our drones. And so we can all be adepts. And so that's a little more subversive, but I think it's interesting to see that's the evolution of the story. It went from an innocent, a stranger in a strange land, being torn up and turned around and disillusioned by Western culture, to someone that comes down with a plan. They know how to get things done, and they have a completely different view of mankind.
Yeah, that's right on. I found myself thinking one thing, because we got obsessed for a short period of time about War of the Worlds. And let's face it, how does that end? Obviously, technologically superior marauding invaders are defeated by what? Amoebas, disease that gets inside them, human disease that we can slough off as a cold would kill them. And I thought, what's the parallel for this particular sequence with The Man Who Fell to Earth? And I think it's interesting. If an advanced alien came here alone, okay, War of the Worlds is the invasion. But if one of them came alone, and by the way, David Grush has certainly said there's bodies and biologics, and there's been ample whistleblowers who imply that there's more than one. But let's say that this one happened. Somebody comes alone and he tries to operate within capitalism and corporate power and the interest of the intelligence agencies, and also addiction to drugs or alcohol and media saturation. If an individual alien came and had to do that, would it be cute like E.T. seeing something on TV that's funny, or would it not be cute? What happens in this version of events, all through all of them, is, I guess the only way I would say it's grimly plausible. Okay. Yeah. You could see that this alien isn't defeated by guns, ray guns or regular guns or anything. That's not what defeats him. He's defeated by Earth, the way that Earth culture
civilization
takes him down. And that's metaphorically very rich. And that's one of the explanations for why as a drama it's successful. But I think it's also probably true. The thing is, if you come in groups, you can survive potentially. But if you come as one, you don't have the upper hand. It may be that you have superior technology and all this stuff, which is certainly possible. But if you're just one individual creature from another planet, you got to walk among us.
Yes.
And the lesson of all of these versions is walking among humans is no picnic.
I was going to say, I feel like a lot of us wake up every day and feel like Thomas Newton, even though we're humans. We feel like aliens in our own world.
But listen, the takeaway for me that I love most is what you just said a few minutes ago, because it's very sound, light, and frequency, which is 45 years have gone on, but what's the difference in the world? And the difference is the world, the very thing we talk about on sound, light, and frequency. There's been this possible slow drip disclosure that makes use of the media, right? Going back to the Robertson panel of 53, but certainly picking up steam through our own experience in the late 90s into some of the things we're learning now. Clearly, people in the time where the Bowie movie was made, we loved a good alien invasion, but we didn't believe they were here now. Now we believe they could be here now.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And that's why these films and TV series and plays and books all matter. Anyway, well done. I endorse what you just said. That was great.
All right. I think that brings us to the end of the road here.
Let's get out of here.
It's been fun to go back and relive one of my bad dates, probably my worst date in high school. I feel like now I can put that behind me and all that trauma is gone.
Let's move on. So we got some great stuff coming up in the rest of the season here, and I'm very excited about all of that. So folks, keep on watching and watch the skies too. See you later. Soundlight and Frequency is an iHeart podcast produced by Stellar Productions. It's executive produced by Nick Johnson, and for Stellar, Jackie Zabel. Our show's music was written by Anna Stumpf and Hamilton Lighthouser. And your hosts and executive producers are Bryce Zabel, that's me, and Brent Friedman. Watch the skies.